This week on Quadriga, Iran's nuclear ambitions. How big is the threat? United Nations weapons inspectors say they have proof the threat is credible and increasingly urgent. This week, the normally cautious International Atomic Energy Agency presented its strongest judgment yet that Iran has been developing a bomb. U.S. and European leaders reacted with alarm, demanding what one called unprecedented sanctions. Israeli media were speculating even before the report about the possibility of a military strike against Iran. Meanwhile, in Tehran, leaders insisted the IAEA was simply acting as an American stooge. Your host, Melinda Crane.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga, the international talk show on DW TV. How big is the threat really, and what can still be done about it? That's what we want to talk about today with three journalists who've been following the story closely.
Joining Melinda Crane in the studio this week, Malting Laming is opinion page editor and the former Washington bureau chief of the Berlin-based newspaper Der Tagesspiegel. Oliver Trainert is a security policy expert with the Berlin-based SWP, the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, focusing, among other topics, on nuclear proliferation. Eldad Beck is based here in Germany, writing for Israel's daily newspaper Yediot Aharonot.
Oliver Trainert, how credible do you see the IAEA findings as being? How close is Iran to developing a bomb?
Well, there are many indications that Iran is really on its way to build a nuclear weapon. We don't know how long it would take really to build one. 1 year or up to 4 years is the experts estimate. But it's clear that this is a nuclear weapons program. That this is not, as Iran time and again is saying, this is only about a peaceful nuclear energy program. And I think that the IAEA put a lot of effort to make clear that this is not only intelligence that they use from the United States. They are saying very clearly in their report.
That, of course, is what Iran is saying, isn't it? It's saying this is all a U.S. fabrication. But they are saying very clearly and that they used information from several member states. That they used information that they received from their own inspectors, that they used open publications, that they also used the information that they were given from the Iranians themselves. And this all gives a picture which clearly shows you that this is about a nuclear weapons program. For instance, to give you one example, if you want to make a uranium metal out of enriched uranium, this is clearly part of a nuclear weapons program. Or if you want to ignite a weapon or a warhead from a ballistic missile above a target, this is research that you only undertake if you are after a nuclear weapon. This is not a peaceful nuclear program. Malting Laming, you were based in Washington at the time that then Secretary of State Colin Powell, George Bush's Secretary of State, went to the UN with his purported evidence on its weapons of mass, on Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, which, of course, proved to be false, unfounded. In view of that experience, what do you think needs to happen here?
That's a good point. There is a difference. Right now we have a UN organization that came to the conclusion that Oliver Trainert just said. So a UN organization is different to the United States Secret Services and to the United States Foreign Minister. Actually, I was quite convinced to that time because I trusted Colin Powell. He was some kind of guy you could trust. And I trusted his evidence because of the firmness in which he presented this evidence seemed to be trustworthy. But this 2003 incident today showed us you really need proof beyond just some satellite imagery photos that could be this and this and this. You really need proof that says they're going to have a weapon or they already have a weapon or something like this.
And how convincing do you find this proof that the IAEA is offering this time?
I think what the Atomic Energy Organization, it's not an unambiguous proof they already are working on a weapon, but what they showed quite clearly is that they do everything that they can switch instantaneously with a political decision to build a weapon. The only question is, how long will it take? They have all the ingredients, the necessary things they need to have. Nothing else is missing instead of the political decision to build a weapon. They can't prove that this is done already.
Eldad Beck, interestingly enough, the U.S. is being quieter this time around, not really beating the drums of war. On the other hand, Israel was talking about possible military action, or at least rumors were circulating even before the International Atomic Energy Agency report came out this week. How likely is a military strike by Israel?
Well, first of all, I think that we are having here a very interesting situation, because the Americans, not only did they react very quietly, they also officially said that Iran stopped its nuclear military program in 2003. And now we have a UN body.
A couple of years ago, they made that finding.
Exactly. Yeah. The UN body is coming now and saying, indeed, there was a stop to a certain program, but at the same time, they started a secret program with this military intention. I do not remember any Israeli official saying clearly that we are going now to a military aggression or action. There were some speculations indeed in the press, which probably came from the opposition. However, Prime Minister Netanyahu said what is said, I think, in every other Western capital, that the military option is on the table, but would be the last option.
So how likely is it that the Israelis will take that last option?
We are certainly getting out of options, having tried many things in the past without any success, and taking into account the fact that the Iranians are getting closer to getting their bomb. On the other hand, one should take into account the fact that the Iranian President, Mr. Ahmadinejad, warned this week very clearly from a NATO attack against Iran that might bring Iran 300 years back, and did not speak of a US-Israeli attack. And I take it that he learned a lesson from what happened recently in Libya, and is probably thinking that this scenario could repeat itself in the case of Iran.
The fact is, though, of course, the West is anything but united when it comes to the prospect of military action.
Sanctions are effective, especially when they're decisive and as comprehensive as possible, meaning when many countries, preferably all, respect them. A military option, I don't see one, and that's why we reject any discussion on the subject.
Oliver Traynert, the German foreign minister, they are very clearly rejecting any military option, talking, however, about sanctions. How effective have they been to date, and what could still be done to make them more effective, to make them really capable of influencing Iranian behavior?
Now, first of all, let me say that international coalition building against the Iranian nuclear program has been relatively successful, to the extent that all veto powers in the United Nations and all other members that are represented there in the Security Council adopted 5 resolutions directed against the Iranian nuclear program, 4 of which included sanctions. I mean, if we would have told the Iranians 5 years ago this is going to happen, that the Chinese and the Russians would agree to such resolutions, they would have laughed at us. So from one angle, it's that this coalition building has been successful, but of course the big caveat is that these sanctions didn't work because we wanted to have everybody on board, and the Chinese and the Russians watered the sanctions down, did not implement them effectively, and so on and so forth. And this was the problem so far, but we also have to take into consideration that the European Union and the Americans went further than the UN sanctions. They implemented their own sanctions, but still have not been effective. So I think we should try again in New York to adopt yet another resolution. I have my doubts whether
Russia and China are not any more likely to go along this time.
I just wanted to say that I have my doubts whether this will be successful. But if sanctions don't work and there is no social upheaval in Iran itself that brings this nuclear program to a halt, then the only option that we still have is a military option, which I'm not entirely against it, but I have my doubts under which circumstances it would really work.
Let's stay with the topic of sanctions briefly before we take another look at the military option. Malte Lemming, how much room do you think there is to further tighten sanctions and make them a really credible, effective instrument here?
But that's hard to say. The first rule is the broader the coalition, the weaker the sanctions are, because you always have to compromise on things. And the Russians and Chinese clearly will say maybe yes on sanctions, but not the very effective ones that might cripple the regime. So this is a dilemma. There may come a point when the West will say, let's have some kind of coalition of the willing. Let's exclude the Russians and Chinese. But then you give up the broad coalition, the isolation of Iran. Mm-hmm. The question of sanctions is always very hard to tell. It worked just once in history. It was against South Africa. Now we have, I think, sanctions against dozens of regimes all over the world, from North Korea to Myanmar to all these places. And they are not that effective as sometimes we think. So the question with Iran is the Iranian society is hard to tell if they are going with the regime, if they suffer from sanctions, or against the regime. Mm. We had upheavals in Iran, very strong ones. The Iranian society is more or less pro-Western oriented, more than in any Arab countries, for example. So it's very hard to tell if they would rebel against their own regime as soon as they suffer from the sanctions, or will go in solidarity with the regime.
Eldad Beck, if the international community does agree on a new round of tighter sanctions in some form, do you think Israel would be prepared to wait and see if those are effective?
Well, the Israeli government declared its readiness to wait if indeed there would be effective and more secured sanctions on Iran, which was not really the case so far, indeed, as was mentioned. And
what might tighter and more effective sanctions look like, in your view? Where would one need to
first
tighten
of all, I think
screws?
that the Iranian regime should be totally boycotted and isolated, which means that we should stop with all the invitations to official delegations and invitations to ministers and representatives of ministries coming to all sorts of international conferences organized here in Germany or in other places, which is really sending the wrong signal to the population of Iran and to the whole world. Trade should be also extremely reduced in a way that would make it difficult for the regime to sustain its viability, and indeed one has to do much more regarding the oil and gas markets of Iran.
But of course, that's where Russia and China come in. China indeed, particularly, very hungry for that oil.
I ask myself, not only that, I think that the Russians and the Chinese, where we do not have any democratic regimes, do not want to see any democratic change in Iran. And this is why they will do everything to support the Iranian regime.
Mm-hmm. Oliver Traynor, if anything seems to have been effective in the last few years in terms of setting back the Iranian nuclear program, wasn't it actually Stuxnet, the computer virus that was introduced into Iran, possibly, some say, by Israeli intelligence, maybe working together with the U.S.? What's your take on Stuxnet, and what's the chance of a Stuxnet 2, a new enhanced Stuxnet?
No, actually, I'm not an expert on computer worms, but I do believe that that really has had an impact. And I think it was a very clever part-time solution, so to speak, because it really had a negative effect on the Iranian nuclear program. But the downside of that is that now the Iranians do understand more effectively how this works, how such sabotage works. They are much better prepared now, and I do believe it will be hard to make this work again. And even worse, maybe sometime they will learn how to use it themselves. And that could backfire to us, so it's very tricky. So on the one hand, I believe it was a good idea. So we bought time through that. But I think it will not work again.
Malte Lemming, computer virus as an alternative to war. The U.S. has been somewhat wary of moving into this area for reasons that Oliver Traynor just outlined, among others, the fact that this would somehow legitimize it and make it a full-blown tool of military action. What do you think? Is it an option?
The last hope. If you buy time, you have you can put your hope on 3 points. The first is the people. As I mentioned before, maybe the people will rebel against their own regime. The second is psychological warfare. Might be even working in between the rank and files in the elite of Iran. We see frictions between Ahmadinejad, the clerics, the revolutionary guards, and so on and so on. So whenever you beat the drum wars, then you create more of these kind of frictions. And the third, clearly, is cyber war. Stuxnet was very effective. And you
supposedly
just
set the program back 2 years, I think.
You just never know what they are working on right now and how effective the next Stuxnet 2 will be. We all have no idea about that. So it's just theoretical, but maybe practical hope as well.
It's hard to say because the P1 centrifuge that they use is unreliable anyway.
No, but the next Stuxnet could work against defense mechanism, not against the program itself, but against defense, radar. Everything is computerized in Iran as well, when it comes to military. So the next Stuxnet could work against these things.
I'd like to come back now to the topic of military action, conventional military action, and first take a look at a couple of the raids that Israel has conducted in the past.
June 1981, Israeli fighters enter Iraqi airspace, flying low across the desert and staying under the radar. They destroy the Iraqi reactor Osirak near Baghdad shortly before it could become operational. Saddam Hussein's nuclear plans are set back by years. September 2007, a similar attack, though never officially confirmed. This time the target is in Syria, a secret nuclear reactor allegedly built with North Korean assistance. The facility is destroyed and later razed to the ground by Syria. Neither Syria nor Iraq attempt to retaliate for the attacks by military means.
Eldad Beck, in the case of Iran, it is often said that a military action would not be as effective as it was in those two cases because the facilities are much more spread out. They're underground. They're hard to get to. The scientists involved have been supposedly implanted in other organizations all over the country. Hard to figure out who's working on what. What do you think? Could a military action even work here?
Well, it depends on what dimension are we speaking of a military action. First of all, I think that one has to emphasize that there is a huge difference between the situations with the Osiris attack and the Syrian attack, because it was a surprise attack. And now everybody is talking about an Israeli attack and the different options, military options. So it's not a big secret. And the Iranians are reading everything that is being written about it. So they are also preparing themselves for such an eventuality. Second, in the Iraqi case and the Syrian case, nuclear power plants were attacked which were not yet active. In the case of Iran, we have at least one plant which is already active, which means that the circumstances and the consequences of an attack could be quite different and quite catastrophic. Now, is such a thing indeed possible or not? I don't think that any of us can give an answer, because those who prepare military plans do everything so that we, simple people, would not know what they are preparing, especially the enemy would not know. But I believe that Israel would not find itself alone in such an operation, and we have seen certain countries and certain armies who have been preparing for such an eventuality, and I'm talking here about Britain, about France, and about Italy.
Malte Leming, is that really conceivable that we would have these countries, or even the U.S., Israel's closest ally, of course, involved in military action? Wouldn't a military strike against Iran in the current circumstances of the Middle East be something that the U.S. devoutly wishes to hinder?
The question for President Barack Obama is, do I want to be the American president under in which time the Iran was allowed to go atomic, nuclear, and risk that Turkey, Saudi Arabia, these countries go nuclear as well? Me, who got the Peace Nobel Prize for nuclear disarmament. So this will be the big question for Barack Obama facing an election in a year from now, if he wants to risk this. So
must he not also ask himself, though, do I want to be the American president who set forth a conflagration across the whole Middle East by attacking a Shiite country which has clients all over the region?
You're right. You're clearly right. This is what he has to keep in mind. The central term for me seems to be escalation dominance, or what you can as well phrase the intra-war deterrence. If you make a certain kind of military attack, but clearly signalizing to the regime in Tehran, this is what we achieved. Maybe a setback for 2 or 3 years of your program, but this is more or less a symbol, a clear military symbol. If you react and retaliate right now, we are able to escalate the war. So in all the stages, you have to keep the escalation dominance by yourself. And this is the only way it would, if it even would work, then like this.
Which means that Israel cannot do it alone, but needs allies and partners, particularly the United States, I would say.
Yes. And is that something you think is conceivable?
Well, I mean, as
the U.S. is a country so weary of war. We have the population of the U.S. groaning under huge debt, unable to agree on deficit reduction. Another war? Do you think there would be support in the U.S. for that, really?
Of course, I have my doubts, and Malte Leming already played out this dilemma that is before President Obama. But and I understand that the American population really doesn't want to go to war again after Iraq and Afghanistan and all the experiences that they made. But nobody is talking about a ground war.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nobody is talking about occupying Iran. Yeah. Nobody is talking about nation building and stuff like that. What we are talking about is stopping this nuclear program.
And the question
this is airstrikes.
And could they be effective? Then the same question to you that I posed to Eldad Beck.
I should say this depends upon your target list. And it depends upon how you plan this war. Escalation dominance is key, as has already been mentioned by Malte Leming. And I think it would be possible. Intra-war deterrence does work. As an example, Saddam Hussein in Operation Desert Storm did attack Israel with Scud missiles, but only with conventional, not with chemical. Because he understood that if he would go so far, he would be finished immediately. And this is the same that the Iranians would be confronted with. If they go too far, they would be finished. And this is escalation dominance, which could be pursued by the Americans.
Eldad Beck, must we not take into consideration in weighing the costs and benefits of military action the political side? I mentioned that the region, of course, is at the moment very, very unstable. You all have talked about the role of the Iranian population, the idea that sanctions could push them closer to the regime. Wouldn't military action do that beyond a doubt?
Well, first of all, I really think that we should differentiate between military action or a blow and a war. These are not two similar things. Secondly, the situation is really so that if you very cleverly choose your targets in Iran in a way that does not affect the global population, you could contribute to a growing tension between the population and the leadership and the regime. Thirdly, one should not forget the global situation in the Middle East, which is indeed explosive, which means that we do have Shiites, minorities or majorities in different countries that could react to such a blow. However, let me remind you that in the past, every time the prospect of war was mentioned in regards to the Middle East, always there was this warning, it is going to cause a fire all over the region, and that was not at the end the case.
Afghanistan, there's a pretty big fire going on in that region at the moment. If we look at what's happening in Pakistan, if we look at the way that it's changed the geostrategic balance, Malte Leming, with all due respect, I find all three of you rather sanguine about the prospect of military action and its effectiveness, given our experiences of the past 10 years with military operations and the law of unintended consequences that they seem to provoke.
Yes, you're clearly right. I mean, and the Americans themselves are sick and tired of wars. They are expensive. They spend billions and billions and trillions of dollars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they want to finish this. The difference is, first of all, the security of Israel is something that is at the heart of most Americans. Second of all, limited strikes. If you don't send ground troops, it's not as expensive as Afghanistan and Iraq was. So these are limited strikes. This plays towards Obama and towards limited strikes, but nothing more.
Thank you very much. That's our signal. Afraid we have to leave it there, but I'm very grateful to all of you for being with us today, and grateful to all of you out there for tuning in.